Live from the sun-drenched cobblestones of the Eternal City, conversations crossing faith, culture, and current events. Civil discourse, civil debate, and the free exchange of ideas. This is Intersections with Bree Dail and Joey Meugniot. And now your hosts, Bree and Joey.
Good morning or good day to wherever you may be. Whether you're listening to us on the radio or watching online, thank you for joining us to start your week. My name is Joey Meugniot. I'm a political advisor, small business consultant, and defense analyst, and a U.S. Army veteran with 2 tours to Afghanistan. And I was enlisted, in case there's a question about that might come up later on. It's your trivia question for the day. I'm excited to share with you my thoughts and analysis on topics and issues that matter and how oftentimes they are so closely connected and we might not realize it. With that being said, I will hand you over to Bree, and she can kick us off with some breaking news out of the Vatican this morning.
Hi, good morning, Joey. And this is Intersections Crossing Faith, Culture, and Current Events. And just a little bit about me before we go to the breaking news. I am an internationally accredited journalist, including accreditation to the Holy See as the Rome correspondent for Newsmax. I'm also the Rome correspondent for the Epoch Times, and you can also find me on National Catholic Register. I hold a bachelor's degree in history from Christendom College and a master's degree in foreign policy and diplomacy from the prestigious Norwich University, and I was a military officer, a U.S. Naval surface warfare officer. So just, like we said, for later on if you have any questions and trivia. So today, out of the Vatican, we've got some breaking news and, hashtag breaking from Bree, right? If those of you who follow me on Twitter, Joey loves to make fun of me on that. But right out of the Vatican this morning, we had Cardinal Robert Sarah issue a statement on a blog by Sandro Magister, who is a Vaticanista here. And Cardinal Sarah made a statement on the closing or the suppression of private masses in St. Peter's. It was very solid, very strong, and really encouraging the Holy Father, advocating on behalf of the people to reopen masses in the Basilica on the side altars. We discussed this last week, Joey. And so it's I would encourage all of you listeners out there to go and read it. It's a beautiful statement, and he was the prefect just recently, the prefect for the Congregation for Divine Worship. So he would be really one of the ones who'd be making the big statements here with regards to masses in St. Peter's. He would not be the only one, but he's definitely one of them. And another big breaking story is that, and this is coming from my sources very close to Cardinal Zen. As you know, I have spoken with Cardinal Zen multiple times, interviewed him here in the Vatican for National Catholic Register. But Cardinal Zen is going to be making a statement as well, advocating on behalf of the people. He'll be also, I believe, making other additional statements with regards to suppression of masses in general. He's really well known to understand that, especially because he's coming out of China. But he was moved this morning by Cardinal Sarah's statement and Cardinal Burke's statement and Cardinal Mueller's statement. So we're starting to see statements from cardinals really advocating to the Holy Father that this really isn't great for the Holy Father, or rather for the Vatican, but also for the Holy Father's legacy of, dialogue and openness and communion, especially with the peripheries. And just kind of on a side note, Joey, what's really interesting is that document that came out, that decree from the Vatican, didn't really give any leeway to those people who are from the different rites, like the Eastern rites, like Malachite rite, or the Middle Eastern rites, or the African rites, or even Dominican rite. It's only for the Roman rite, i.e., the normal masses that we're kind of used to, unless you're from the Middle East. So what we're really hoping for and what we're praying for is that, the side altars that stand empty will be filled again by priests, and that the Holy Father will maybe make that announcement. Wouldn't it be great, Joey, if he did it on Holy Thursday, which is really traditionally the feast for priests?
It would be interesting if he did it then. And is there a timeline, Bree? Do you know when Cardinal Zen might make this statement? Is it going to be relatively soon? And what do you think that we'll hear out of him? And what do you think the impact will be? Do you have any your 2 cents on that?
Right. So I actually just heard from my source just now. I just was looking at my phone just now. I just heard from my source. Cardinal Zen is so tired, and I think people have to understand. He was not just the prior Cardinal of Hong Kong, but he was like the prior Cardinal of Hong Kong. He's older, and yet every day he goes to the jails in Hong Kong to visit Jimmy Lai and other Catholics and other prisoners there for the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong. That's really his heart and his mission now, and to advocate for a permanent bishop in Hong Kong, which still hasn't taken place, coming out of the Vatican, a bishop for the people. As you know, I interviewed him this past summer, why he came to the Vatican. But to answer your question, it looks like he'll be making that statement either today or tomorrow. And I know that some of us journalists have already been told, but this morning I was speaking with Cardinal Zen's close companion, and and advocated that something like this could potentially occur, where he would put out a statement, since Cardinal Sarah has done, and he agreed that it would be a potential benefit to the people, since he is definitely a voice of so many people, and especially the people of the East and the forgotten, persecuted.
Yeah, and if there's anyone that knows about the persecution of Christians or suppression of masses, it would probably be him. He seems like
Right.
kind of the world's foremost expert on that particular topic. So,
Right out of China, right?
absolutely, yeah. And this is kind of so we talked about that last week, and we'll continue to update as things happen and as things change. But also, Bree, we did talk last week about a conference that was going to happen, and I know we both watched it. You took different notes than I did and had some different takeaways. So it was called the Advancing Integral Disarmament in Times of Pandemic. That was the title of the and who can you kind of remind everyone who sponsored it and who kind of the important parties were in that particular conference, and then we'll talk a little bit more about it as we move into kind of our first big topic of the day.
Well, it was sponsored by multiple individuals, including the UN. So I think that's the first kind of wink and nod. But the two really head clergymen who spoke during that time, those coming out of the Curia, were Cardinal Turkson, and also Cardinal Pietro Parolin is the Secretary of State. So this is a pretty important conference for the Vatican to have two of the leading cardinals speak on disarmament. And that is actually something also that the Holy Father has been really promoting alongside the UN. So Joey, when we start to talk about this, because I'm really interested in the notes that you took, but I also asked some questions that were not answered, unfortunately, but I did send them to the cardinals, and I think people would be interested in kind of what I was interested in hearing from both Cardinal Turkson and Cardinal Parolin. But you first.
Awesome. So as we were watching this and looking as this kind of conference was progressing, right, what I noticed is that they're using COVID-19 as a vehicle to pursue disarmament. We were told by leaders of today's church that we could free up much needed funding for the efforts of reducing poverty and hunger and the loss of livelihoods due to the pandemic. And there was a call to redirect resources from national defense towards global problems facing us in 2021 and beyond. That was kind of the big umbrella, or the burrito wrap, if you will, that all of this was kind of stuffed into, the tortilla, the
Right.
tortilla of COVID. So while that all sounds fantastic at face value, and I'm sure there are definitely some world leaders out there that would love nothing more than the people and nations to be disarmed, and to have that money to spend on their pet projects for the alleged greater good. I'd like to remind everyone that's listening that those same world leaders are largely to blame for the continued economic impact of COVID-19 in the first place. So
Right.
using this pandemic to usher in changes to long-held beliefs or to systems, as if it's some kind of moral imperative that we do this things, or else things will never go back to normal, it kind of seems to be the theme that I continue to hear about everything. We talk about, getting back to normal, or what's the new normal, all of these phrases that we keep seeing thrown around. And
Or build back better, because that was actually quoted multiple times, build back better or great reset. But build back better was a quote that I heard a few times during that conference.
And it sounds so good. They all sound so great. And it's I want to call it the phraseology, the marketing, the mental games that they're playing to try and to sell some, the rhetoric, right? That they're trying to sell some of these ideas. And what I find interesting is this pontificate is embroiled in numerous financial scandals and shady business dealings that we've heard about for months and years now. And while at the same time decrying the idolatry of money and consumerism, we've got the high-rise deal in London that I don't recall it being for the homeless or for, helping in poverty or any way. And it was a multi-million-dollar, maybe billion-dollar in euros anyway, multi-million-dollar deal. And it just seems like there's a flood of hypocrisy that just continues to be ignored. And I say this not to throw fuel on the fire or attack the Vatican in any way, but I think that there are some gross inconsistencies with the things that they say and the different actions that they're taking all over the world. It seems like in one argument we say that there's a humanitarian crisis going on in Myanmar, but then we ignore stuff in China or
in Hong Kong,
and in Hong Kong. Like,
right.
And on the other side of it, we have let's disarm the largely Western nations because there was no talk of China in any of this. Let's disarm Western nations and move all that money that we would potentially save. And I'm curious to see why. That's just my takeaway. And I don't understand why all the time we want to continue to attack institutions that we hold dear. And with nations doing the exact opposite of disarmament lately, how do you think we're going to bring China to the table to discuss peace, right?
Right, and that's actually one of the questions I asked, Joe, if I can jump in, is that I went to Cardinal Pietro Parolin, who is the broker of the Sino-Vatican deal, and this is one of the things that we don't really know what's in the deal, right? But we are seeing kind of, and one of our listeners actually just put in, like, the Chinese have actually taken the words of the Bible and rewritten it for propaganda. So there hasn't been really any statements with regards to that. We don't know what's going on except for what is being leaked out of China to the Christian churches. We definitely know what's going on with the Uyghurs, and we spoke about that this past week, but that's been going on for decades with the Christians and the breakdown of churches and the placing of, President Mao's face over, in place of like a crucifix. So these things happen, and the Sino-Vatican deal was meant, according to Cardinal Parolin, that to try to increase the dialogue and the unity and help the church, but we're not really actually seeing that at all. And so I asked Cardinal Parolin, like, with all of this beautiful discussion about disarmament. Countries don't feel safe when China has, in the last year built more warships than, and we talked about this past week, more warships than throughout the U.S. did throughout the entirety of World War II. They have the largest Navy in the world now, and they are actively promoting, the growth of their military. Has the Vatican at all discussed disarmament from the Chinese side? Because certainly the West is not going to disarm when China continues to show a force,
And it doesn't seem like they ought to either. Everyone needs to be involved, or we have to take a different approach to a lot of this, with the UK discussing rebuilding their nuclear armament. And there's a lot more to this particular topic. We are coming up to our first break, so we will continue this discussion after the break. I want to talk a little bit more about appeasement and some of the questions you asked and what the potential answers that we can expect or we might have after the break.
So, some Jehovah's Witnesses knock on your door. You're ready to defend Jesus' divinity, but they throw you a curveball and deny the divinity of the Holy Spirit. What do? Well, first, you could turn to 1 Corinthians 2:11, where Paul says, "No one comprehends the thoughts of God except the Spirit of God." If the Spirit can comprehend the infinite thoughts of God, he must be infinite, and thus God. You could then turn to Acts chapter 5, verses 1 through 4, and here Peter rebukes Ananias and Sapphira for lying to the Holy Spirit. But then a few sentences later says they lied to God. How can lying to the Holy Spirit be the same as lying to God unless the Holy Spirit is God? So with verses like these, you can hit that curveball and defend the divinity of the Holy Spirit. I'm Carlo Broussard with a ready reason for Catholic Answers, Catholic.com.
In Nicaragua, many children growing up in rural areas don't know what it's like to have clean, safe drinking water. Their water sources are often shared with farm animals, and the water is infested with high levels of bacteria. Together, we can change that. Cross Catholic Outreach works with local Christian partners to provide clean, abundant water to families in need. This mission dramatically transforms the health and lives for generations to come. Visit crosscatholic.org/transform to learn more.
And thank you for joining us this morning as we discuss our topics and news of the day. This is Intersections with Bree Dail and Joey Meugniot, crossing faith, religion, and politics, throwing in some current events, and then our hot takes and analysis on some of these particular issues. So before the break, we were discussing this conference that had happened at the Vatican. And Bree, we were talking about the questions that you asked, and I wanted to get back over to you to kind of dig into some of these questions. And what answers are you expecting from them, if any at all? Are you expecting an answer, and what would you like to hear from them?
You know, I'm not expecting an answer, unfortunately. And it's because I think I ask very poignant questions, and a lot of times you do that live, and they are pressured to answer. But when you're doing it online, which is a benefit to the speakers, not so much to those in the press, they get to pick and choose what they answer, what questions they get back to, which is actually one of the reasons why it's been very frustrating for those of us in the press to be getting answers from the Holy See Press Office as well, is because we're contacting them via email and through phone, and it is common when you don't have a comment for a press officer to get back to you or circle back, as we know. But right now we're just not hearing anything, and it is difficult. It's difficult for them, I think, because some of the documents that have come out recently haven't gone through them. And one of those would have been the decree from the Secretary of State. They didn't. I don't believe they received that decree in advance because the Vatican Press Office has said nothing about the decree, except this morning, Joey, which was another breaking news right before we got on. The press office made an announcement on the administrative change to the oversight of St. Peter's Basilica. And some of my sources are looking at this and saying, very interesting that they've made this announcement today. It could just be coincidence, but they make no real definitive statement on the decree itself. But they do say that all statements and all decrees have been passed to a new cardinal. And so the implementation of those statements and those decrees. So it might be, we might be seeing an opening of a door there to show kind of maybe a backtracking. And let's just pray for that, because I know a lot of people, simple people want to go to Mass in the morning, and many, many priests are very unhappy. I think most people are really unhappy about this decree. But to go back to the conference, Joey, something else that I actually asked, and it was to Cardinal Turkson, and it really bridges what we were talking about before with, leaders of nations spending money on their pet projects instead, and this use of the pandemic to discuss integral, economy, integral disarmament, integral ecology. Integral is really the key word right now. one of the things that I found very interesting when I asked Cardinal Turkson is that he is also associated with a group that was founded, a council that was founded specifically for inclusive capitalism. And I know that we've discussed this before, Joey. It's one of your favorite councils here, but not really associated to the Vatican. The Vatican has kind of walked itself back from association, but it's still engaging and getting spiritual direction, as they say, from Cardinal Turkson. What is really interesting is that he's very involved and very outspoken, Cardinal Turkson, on things that have to do with ecology and, you know, the environment and whatnot. He's very close to Pope Francis on that. But what I reached out and I asked, I said, how is, disarmament connected to capitalism and including inclusive capitalism? And then I asked him, with his close association to the nation of Qatar, who is in an arms race right now and has been with the UAE, how does that affect his relationship with Qatar? So both Qatar and China both are growing their military, growing their arms. They are in an arms race, Qatar with the UAE. How are Cardinal Parolin and Cardinal Turkson engaging these nations that they have associated themselves with? Again, I don't expect an answer from either.
And I think there's two things to unpack here quickly. So if you haven't heard about the Council on Inclusive Capitalism, I want you to, when you get a moment, Google that, come back here, and then put the comments below what you think about that, either on Facebook or YouTube, wherever you are watching this, however you get this. Go look it up, and then go tell me. I mean, my impression is that capitalism is pretty inclusive by default, so I didn't know that we needed a separate type of capitalism to be more inclusive. So do that if you have a moment. Look it up. It's fascinating. The people involved in it are fascinating. Not people you would expect, but fascinating nonetheless. The other thing is we've had a lot of statements from cardinals about many issues. We've talked about statements from cardinals A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and we've heard of all of these things. And answering questions, when it comes to the official statements of the Holy See, it appears that there's kind of a lack of communication, period, full stop. So, however, there is a policy of appeasement being implemented, not just by the Holy See, but by nations worldwide, a policy of appeasement implemented on a global level. So this has happened before, historically, and luckily we had a pontiff that recognized it and tried to warn us all that this policy of appeasement was a poor judgment and should not be done. And I'm curious who in the church is going to stand up this time. Luckily, last time it was the Pope. This time, who's it going to be? Who's going to stand up and say that we can't continue to do these things? We have to be answerable, not to just the people, but to God, right? We have to, someone has to stand up and say something that is in a position to stand up and say something. And
on authority, right? Yeah, on authority.
Someone with authority. And it's interesting, we talk about questions, we talk about the press, we talk about the people asking questions, and that's an interesting kind of segue into our next topic, which is about this press conference that the U.S. president gave last week, which was enlightening, to say the least. So, Bree, do you have any quick comments on that, and then we'll get into some of my thoughts on the press conference and freedom of the press.
Well, I actually have a comment that's an aside to the press office itself or the press conference itself, because I think it's connected, Joey. It's about keeping one another in the press as a journalist, keeping each other accountable to the truth, right? There was a video that I put out by James O'Keefe, who is a well-known investigative journalist. Whether you like him or you hate him, he's had over 336 retractions from his fellow journalists who have printed things about either himself, his investigations, or, other investigations that he has uncovered and had to pressure them to retract, and they have 336. That's a lot. And that's because he hits with the truth and facts and the law, and he doesn't broker any kind of wishy-washy shading reporting, which we see quite a bit on either side of the aisle nowadays, a lot of inflammatory rhetoric. And again, I'm not promoting him. I'm just saying I found it very interesting that he came out and he held accountable a journalist who was later fired 2 days after he held him accountable from Huffington Post, which is known to be quite incendiary and very left-leaning, because this journalist did not do their report accurately. They cited well-known case against him, but not the results of the case. They just said that he was federally investigated, that he broke into phone records and whatnot. And you'll see the entire video if you look it up. It's on his Facebook page. He also has placed it up on Twitter, I believe. But he came out and he held that particular journalist accountable, and he had some very strong words about being falsely accused of a crime he did not commit, which was the result of the actual court case against him. And I think that's really important because, when we're reporting, and what we're going to be talking about in a second, when we're reporting about what is being said, holding one another accountable, you cannot softball things, especially in the press. And because the press is, and I put this on Twitter, the press is the weapon of the people. It's meant to hold our leaders accountable. And if we're going to do that, then we have to be held accountable, whether right or left, to the truth. If we have anonymous sourcing, which that has to take place because, not everybody's going to be going on record, then we have to go a step further as journalists and find something to corroborate, an email that's redacted, a text that's redacted, something that shows this is not coming from us, this is coming from another source, or this is coming from a place in, the state or in, the Vatican or whatnot. We still have to hold each other accountable because that's how fake news begins. That's how people infiltrate. So looking at what happened at the press conference, one of the first things that I noted, Joey, and I'm going to throw this back to you because I know you also noted this, is that President Biden only took questions from friendly press, or those that his administration deemed friendly. Now, I don't remember that being the case with Trump. He had very contentious relationships with individuals from CNN and also, but he took their questions. But this was the first live press conference with, solo press conference with President Biden. And here he only took questions from friendly press, and he had those on a list in front of him. So, and this was brought up by, I think his name's James Ducey, the next day with regards from Fox News, with regards to why is Fox News not on that list as well? Everybody else is. So, what did you think, Joey? I thought it was really scripted and quite soft.
Yeah, I it's funny you briefly mentioned, the press and retractions and things, and I noticed that the Washington Post retracted a lot of the things they had said about the former President Trump and his phone call with the Georgia Secretary of State and how that all went down. But the damage was already done, and I think if journalists did a little less opining and more reporting on fact, they wouldn't have this problem. They wouldn't have to retract all of these statements. So when it comes to the press, I think that's kind of one of the key issues there. So with regards to President Biden's press conference, I thought that it was a spectacle that P.T. Barnum would have been proud of. It was quite possibly the worst press conference in recent memory, and it really brought into question his ability to handle the job. And some of my, we'll call them lowlights from his press conference include he talked about when he came into the Senate 120 years ago. This is a quote, so I'll put my quote fingers up here. So so the best way to get something done if you hold near to you that you like to be able to anyway, end quote. That's my new favorite presidential quote. And the fact that he misses former President Donald Trump Those
He
were
said
kind of
that.
the big
I
ones.
did not. I didn't pick that up, but he said that.
Yeah, he
He
did.
missed President.
Yeah, so me too, Joe. Me too. So he then proceeded to take pre-selected questions from specific reporters whose questions it appeared to have been known ahead of time. And then on the podium, he had a binder full of reporters' pictures and what appeared to be notes on all of them, which isn't unusual. The fact that they were pre-selected, that's the part that sticks with me. You got a binder, you have to remember everybody in the room, little notes about them and some of the things you want to say. I do the same thing. We all
a binder, like a binder full of women, like a binder full of journalists.
Reporters. Yeah, binder full of reporters. So the other thing is that it's clear now that he's being stage managed by his aides and people who were definitely not elected to run the executive branch of the U.S. government. And that should be a concern to all Americans.
Right.
The press corps largely gives him and his entire administration a wide berth, a pass, if you will. Aside from certain White House reporters, Emerald Robinson comes to mind, who are actually asking really tough questions on a regular basis. The press needs to
she's
start
my
doing
colleague. By the way, she's my colleague at Newsmax. That's a little hat tip to them.
She has pretty fantastic questions, and a lot of times she gets a lot of circle back answers, right, from Jen Psaki, the press secretary. So, but I imagine that the press won't do their jobs, mainly because that's not what their editors, producers, and handlers have told them to say and ask and do, and that needs to change. That's kind of the primary issue here. So it was a difficult press conference to watch. It was a difficult. It was painful to watch him maneuver around the questions, even if they were pre-scripted. They knew what they were going to get asked. They knew what the answer generally were going to be, and they were softball questions.
Right.
The only real hard-hitting stuff that came at him, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, was any question about the border, and that's a tease to later. So we're going to talk about the border hopefully before the end of the show. But yeah, so Bree, what do you have to say?
Well, I was asked what question I would ask the president if I was sitting down in the press corps, and he called upon me, and that was from my friend and former Your Voice America host, Buzz Patterson, who is running for Congress in California again. He ran this time, and he's going to run again. And he was the former Air Force officer who carried the nuclear codes, or as we call them, the football, for President Clinton. So he asked me, what would I ask? And, I sat there and I thought about it, Joey, because, you have one chance to ask the president, and that's it. And for me, it wasn't the border. It was more of a crisis closer to Washington, D.C. We've discussed the powers that the president has to enact certain emergency measures, including Title 32 for the National Guard. And that allows for money from the Pentagon to the National Guard and from federal agencies to the National Guard to enact them and to place them in situations where in the United States where they can work on supporting the local authorities there. I would have asked the president why the National Guard is still in Washington, D.C., why there's still chain link fence and barbed wire around the Capitol, what state of emergency we are in, how much that is costing us every day, and if he has extended his ruling on Title 32. I don't think that has happened, and I'm wondering where the questions are with regards to that. It's almost as if people have forgotten that, now that the news cycle has generated a few weeks, that our National Guard is still there. And Joey, you are National Guard. I mean, you understand what it takes to place people in a situation like this and what these guys are going through. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I don't think that it's probably for the best in the best interest of not only the soldiers that are there. Just this is purely my complete opinion. This is the opinion of Joey. I don't think it's probably in the best interest of the soldiers to continue to be there. It's probably not in the best interest from an optics standpoint that the military is still deployed to our nation's capital. Also, it brings into question the authorization to use military force, which has been an ongoing thing since 2002. And I think it's an interesting topic that's coming back around now because of this. And it's seeing support on both sides of the aisle, which is fascinating because normally it doesn't. Normally these kind of discussions, it's purely partisan. Whoever's in power, that party wants to continue the authorization to use military force, and the minority party does not. But now you're seeing the combination of different people in Congress coming together to say that things like this shouldn't happen. With the National Guard being there and them not being other places, like the border, you're
Yes,
going to
exactly.
continue. You're going to continue to see questions like this get asked by like Americans, just average Americans, looking at everything as it's kind of sitting there and saying, "Hey, something doesn't quite add up here. I don't understand why they're there,
Right.
and not somewhere else where there actually is, even if it's not a military action, even if it was humanitarian action, which is a lot of the stuff that the National Guard does. They work mostly peacetime stateside deployments. They're there for hurricane relief. They were in Puerto Rico for the hurricane relief. They do, when rivers flood and there's tornadoes, the National Guard gets called in. That's
And
one of the whole points.
It's part of what we call defense support of civil authorities. It's there to help the civil authorities when they need to have some support, man hours, organizations, that kind of thing. That's what is like the first 24, 48 hours of a natural disaster or an emergency. The local forces are oftentimes overwhelmed. They are not as prepared on the local and state level, and so that's what occurs is that the president authorizes a state of emergency, and then the governor authorizes a state of emergency, and then enacts the National Guard to try to support the defense support of civil authorities. On the aside, Joey, I also wanted to ask another question to the president with regards to a recent interview that he did with George Stephanopoulos, where he said George Stephanopoulos, who is very much left-leaning, he was an advisor to President Clinton and to Hillary Clinton, and now is part of the press. Shock. He asks President Biden, what has happened with the withdrawal or drawdown of military troops out of Afghanistan, which is one of the things that President Trump was trying to do, put American first and to not have our military out in, in harm's way in places where, some believe we don't have national interest and, or there's no longer a national interest. And the president came back and he said, well, this is a problem, this is a problem that was difficult to really roll out because he didn't really have a good changeover from President Trump, just like the vaccines. And so he, in two or three sentences, he blames President Trump for his not withdrawing the troops because of a turnover issue and also vaccines. So I wanted to ask him, how is that legitimate since he's been in for so long now, and this has been a priority, and it had been already enacted, so it was happening, and all of a sudden there's been a pause. So that was something also I wanted to ask, because again, what we're seeing and what we're going to be talking about is down at the U.S. border. And some of the issues that we're seeing down there, we are literally seeing a state of emergency happening down at the border. So what is occurring? And then our president left Washington, D.C. this past weekend and went back to Delaware. So I don't know. I feel like a lot of people are starting to, and I've actually seen it. You actually mentioned it before we came on. You had seen on Twitter individuals who were saying, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I miss President Trump. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I've seen. I follow a lot of things on Twitter, but it's surprising that a lot of people are now coming out and saying, even people that didn't vote for him are like, well, at least I knew what was going on, and I had some kind of insight into what was going on with the government.
Press
and why
conferences every day, and
yeah, right. And that's Long sigh. That's what's frustrating about a lot of it, is we had that as a country. We at least knew what was happening on a daily basis. Now we don't. And even though the press was largely hostile towards the former president, at least he took questions. At least he answered questions. He wasn't afraid to take questions. He wasn't afraid to get hit with, a heater right down the plate. Right. And he'd oftentimes just crank it right over the fence. But it's such a complete 180 to go from that to this administration, where we don't get answers on a lot of things, or they blame other people or try to spin their way out of it. And that's not really fair or just to the American people. I get frustrated by it a lot, and it's just it's not what I expect from my government, and it shouldn't be what you expect from your government either. It really shouldn't.
Right. Speaking of expecting from our government, we received a question online from one of our listeners who asked me what I thought about a recent video that popped up, Joey, out of Texas, of a pregnant Catholic woman being escorted off the properties and threatened to be arrested or handcuffed out of church after she had received communion because she wasn't wearing a mask. And this is in Texas, where the masks, laws have been lifted, and even within that diocese, which I believe was Dallas, that bishop has said that wearing a mask is optional. It is not a requirement. It's a disturbing video. I've seen a few interviews with her afterwards. It's a disturbing video. I would be interested in hearing what the side of the priest is. I haven't in any of the interviews that I've seen. It's been her side, which I understand, but I think it's right and just when you report to get both sides and let other people make decisions for them. So that would be my take on it. I have not heard from the priest. I've not heard from the bishop, and I have heard and seen the video from her, and it is quite sad. It's quite sad. I'm not sure if the police officer who was talking to her was really comprehending what was taking place. So it's about decision making. It's about leadership, and I think when we get back, Joey, we are going to talk about decision making and leadership, aren't we? We're going to be talking about the crisis at the border. And, if you have any questions, if you have any comments, please put them in our boxes and our feeds, and leave a like and share out. And thank you for listening. If you're listening to us on the radio, this is Intersections with Bree and Joey. We'll be back shortly.
The Catechism defines an indulgence as a remission before God of the temporal punishment due to sins whose guilt has already been forgiven. But is it biblical to say punishment remains after God has forgiven our sins, and that we can do something to satisfy it? I think it is. For example, David is forgiven of his sin in 2 Samuel 12, but yet must suffer the death of his son. Even Jesus teaches in Luke 12 that the servant who sins without full knowledge will be punished, but in a lesser degree. It is such temporal consequences that indulgences remit. Exercising her power to bind and loose, the Church grants indulgences to help her children heed St. Paul's exhortation in Philippians 2:12, work out your salvation. So, is the Catholic understanding of an indulgence biblical? You bet it is. I'm Carlo Broussard with the ready reason for Catholic Answers, Catholic.com.
Looking for a Catholic university where the greatest works of Western and Catholic tradition are the foundation for learning, all in an environment that is faithful to the magisterium? Recommended by the Cardinal Newman Society, the University of Dallas offers an exceptional liberal arts education, preserving the wisdom of the past while preparing students for world-changing futures. Academically excellent, always faithful. Apply today at udallas.edu.
welcome back. This is Intersections, Crossing Faith, Culture, and Current Events. This is Bree Dail. I am joined by my always intrepid co-host, Joey Meugniot. And Joey, before we get to the border crisis, we actually have some breaking news coming out on the internet right now. HuffPo, actually. Woo! I believe it's either HuffPo or Washington Post. I'm looking right now, saying that vaccine passports are on their way. This is coming from the Biden administration. Reportedly, Mike Cernovich and others are retweeting this right now, and it is coming from, Washington Post. What do you think? Emerald Robinson came out and said, what do Christians think about this, about, vaccines being mandatory or made mandatory for travel and, engagement in, certain public events? We are actually been seeing stories of churches where I saw this morning, only certain people who've been vaccinated are being told that they could receive confession in person in certain states, and that's definitely against canon law. By the way, you cannot withhold the sacraments from individuals. So that, I'm sure, will be shot down very quickly by bishops. But Joey, vaccine passports. Do you want to ever go home to the United States? Are you going to get your vax?
Vaccine passports. I've been saying for a year that this was coming, and people that didn't believe me, I was right. I told you they were happening. It's a thing. It's going to be a thing. It will forever be a thing. The other thing that I thought was interesting, and I saw on Twitter last night or this morning, I forget, was that, and I don't know where the church is, but they had the pews split down the middle. So on the left-hand side, you had those that were not vaccinated. On the right-hand side, you had the pews that were vaccinated.
Also not canonical.
So it just reminds me of being asked for your papers, show me your papers. I don't think that's to get on the subway, to get on a train, to get on a plane, to go into a store. I have to prove all of this thing. And it's Catholics and Christians for a long time have been warning the West, warning the United States, warning our fellow Americans for a long time that it's a slippery slope. If we do this, we do that. And then we get called names. We get called bigots and racists and sexists and homophobes and all of these things. It's a slippery slope. And then the next thing you know, what we said was going to happen is happening. It happens all the time. It happens literally all the time. Because if they do vaccine passports, what's the next thing that they're going to have? They're going to say you have to have an RFID chip implanted in your hand. Otherwise, you won't be able to open a bank account.
It kind of sounds conspiracy theory, but that's a term that was created by the CIA to push out disinformation. So that is something that takes place. That conspiracy theories, they take the truth and then they go one step further, right? But I think that one of the things we have to realize is the boiling frog effect. One of the things that Americans are very well known for is that we give over our rights with hesitation. We haven't really seen that because of fear being manipulated. And that is something that I do have a quote, and I keep using it over and over again. Hillary Clinton, at the beginning of the whole pandemic, said in an online town hall with Joe Biden that this would be a terrible crisis to waste. And if you understand that when crises come up and you permit the government or people in powers that you think are going to be temporary, they're going to try to keep those powers as long as possible, which then goes back to what we were talking about earlier, the press holding those individuals that are elected officials, holding them accountable, which then means that the people have to hold the press accountable. So it's trickled down again to the left or right and saying, where's your facts? Where's your data? Go and ask the hard questions. Go and do the interviews. Go and do the research. Don't just tell us what you think, but provide us the information so that we may inform how we want to think, right? And so it's just interesting because, we're going to be talking now for the rest of this time. Unless you have questions, which you can go ahead and drop into our, our feed, our Facebook page, or Twitter, and whatnot. And please definitely keep doing that, even if we are just rerunning this. Keep asking us questions because we will respond. We're going to be talking about the border crisis because sovereignty, Joey, is one of those main areas that really keeps a country, right? From the Treaty of Westphalia all the way to now, the Peace of Westphalia, all the way to now, countries have the right to have borders. Countries have the right to have laws and to enact those laws. Point stop. That is Treaty of Westphalia. So what is happening at the border, Joey?
Well, they're definitely not checking their vaccine passports. I can tell you that much. So in his press conference, President Biden claimed that they were turning away a majority of people at the border. That turns out is flatly false. The percentage is 13%, which is not a majority. For those that are keeping track at home, that's about 13,000 who tried to cross the border illegally were turned away. I'm not a mathematician, but like I said, 13% is not a majority. But with the state of education the way it is in the United States, I could see why they might think that. And the crisis at the U.S. border, the crisis at the U.S. border is unsurprising if you've been paying attention for the last 4 or 5 years. Former President Trump was talking about this in 2015 and 2016, leading up to his victory. He's been talking about the border for a long time. It is a problem. It is a crisis. Not only is it an economic, there will be an economic impact. There'll be a social impact. But more importantly, right now, there's a humanitarian crisis that is happening at the border. And for all the pearl clutching and soapboxes that we find around Washington, D.C. These days, I'm blown away that we can't treat it as a crisis and we aren't doing the things that we would normally do for a humanitarian crisis. And I was particularly surprised at the press conference that President Biden didn't injure himself when he reached back so hard to try and blame former President Trump for the crisis at the border, while simultaneously calling it a cyclical event. That's the new, that's kind of the new narrative that we're seeing come out of the White House. Is it's President Trump's fault, or at the same time, it's supposed to happen. I'm not quite sure how those two things marry up, but in their mind that they do. So it's either former President Trump's fault or it's a cyclical event where tens of thousands of people are flooding across our border, who I might add, they've interviewed them at the border, and they've said the only reason that they're coming across the border now is because President Biden told them that they should come. So I feel like it's an induced crisis. It is a crisis. It's not a challenge. It's not anything else. It's a crisis, and it should be treated as such. We've either got to... Well, the National Guard needs to be, if they're going to continue to be deployed to Washington, D.C. for whatever reason, they need to be redeployed to the border immediately. They need to get a handle on what's going on and give CBP, the Customs Border Patrol, the resources that they need. I mean, the fact that we have U.S. senators that are going down to the border, that there are tens of thousands of people in these facilities. Some of these facilities are at 1,500% capacity, overcapacity.
Right.
Obviously, 100 would be at full capacity.
Unaccompanied children, which we know that when that took place during the the first Biden administration, or the second, the Obama administration, when that happened and there were children in cages, and remember, for those of you listening, remember those photos that were leaked out claiming, by the press again, claiming that those were children in cages during the Trump administration. It actually ended up being they had to do a massive retraction, that those photos of children in, these chain link fence cages were actually from the Obama period presidency. That many of these unaccompanied minors were lost in the system. And I hate to use that term, lost in the system, because we don't really, why are we putting unaccompanied minors into our federal system for housing and whatnot? This is a prime example of what could take place for human trafficking and children being trafficked for, horrible, horrendous things, whether it's slave labor, which we have had situations in the United States, documented situations of that taking place, or even worse, like sex trafficking and whatnot. So, long story short, when it comes to this type of thing, this is what the federal government is meant to do, right? It's within the powers of the federal government to defend our country's borders. And I'm really interested. Yeah. Go ahead.
There's few things that the federal government is actually exceptionally good at. This happens to be one of them. The other is raising taxes and telling us how they're going to spend money. But the other thing that they're really good at is is this. This is what one of the few things that is they have to compete. It's their purview. It's what they're supposed to be doing. This is their job. This is their time to shine. Their moment in the spotlight. They want to take away states' rights and do a lot of other things and tell us how we should be living our lives. This is actually the particular moment when they should be doing something, and they're not. So, what can you do? Call your congressman, write your congressman, tell them to exercise their ability as a representative or a senator to fix this crisis, to stop the humanitarian crisis going on at our southern border. So I will leave you with that. I know Bree's got some closing thoughts, but I want to ask you this. If you've found value on our show today, give this video a like, or you've been commenting, continue to do that. And make sure you catch us every week here at this time. If you're listening on the radio, then when you have a moment, head on over to youtube.com/grnonline. You can find this video and lots of others. Please give them a watch, share them with your friends. And I'd like to ask you to join us every week and be a part of our community that we're building here, and share this with others if you think they would like it and would like to listen. So with that being said, I'll send it back over to Bree to finish us out for this week.
Well, I also wanted to add to that, please follow me on Twitter, Bree Dail, and Joey as well. Joey, what's your handle?
That's a great question.
Nah.
I just changed it. I'll let you know. I'll put it in the
okay,
comments.
We'll post
How
it.
about
Yeah,
that?
we'll put it in the post.
I'll put it in the comments.
But we also are on Facebook as well, and then all of the other Gab and YouTube and all of these. We're wanting people to interact and to engage. We hope to open up phone calls later. But for now, we want to close with just engaging you to be an activist if you must. Speak to your priest. Speak to your bishop. Speak to your senators. Engage. People want civil discourse. And with that, this is Bree and Joey for Intersections, where faith and culture and current events meet. We hope to see you next week on Monday. God bless you and take care.